Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at BTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at the current situation in the aftermath of the devastating floods that have affected the country and have also impacted more than 33 million people within the country. They have also, of course, damaged millions of hectares of cultivated land. We also know that there is a lot that is going on in terms of human suffering, rehabilitation, rescue efforts that are still ongoing, and there are numerous people that are still suffering from starvation, from hunger, from access to clean drinking water, from diseases. There are, of course, a lot of pregnant women, children, diseased people. There's so many people out there who need our help, and we still see that the kind of massive support that is needed in the country is not yet being given. The scale at which the damages exist in the country and that the crisis exists is perhaps not as well understood even now by our international partners, in the conversation regarding climate change does not include loss and damage, and perhaps there needs to be more responsibility. A lot of this was also quoted in the recent visit of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, to Pakistan, in which he spoke about the kind of issues that need to be highlighted, especially in terms of the responsibility and the justice that needs to exist in terms of those who are responsible for global carbon emissions to step up and provide justice to the people and be more responsible and act regarding the urgency around climate change and the potential impact that it has on countries like Pakistan. This is us today and what we are facing in terms of these floods, and there may be other countries who are going to be impacted. There was also, of course, discussion on issues of resilient infrastructure, of capacity building, of obviously also providing sustained support to Pakistan, because as we know, the flood waters still haven't receded, and we'll be able to assess the damage perhaps after that. And then, of course, there's rehabilitation, there's the food security crisis, there's crisis regarding people and the diseases that keep on increasing, which is going to take a long time to, of course, be able to recover from, and we need massive international support regarding that. So we're going to be talking about the UN Secretary General's visit and his statements regarding justice and the fact that this is a scale the scale of the catastrophe is something that he hasn't seen before, and that the world needs to act in a lot better ways than they have so far, and that, of course, the issues around climate change must have the conversation of loss and damage. That's going to be our discussion today in the show. We've been joined, of course, in the studios by senior analyst Farrukh Batafi, as always. We've also been joined by Mr. Ehsan Ali Khanji, who's policy advisor, agriculture sector, and we've been joined online by Mr. Safwan Akram Nizamani, who's owner Nizamani Farms, Dando Alayar. We've also been joined by Dr. Hamid Khan, who's a senior analyst. Thank you very much, everyone, for being with us in the show today. Farrukh, when we take a look at what has been going on, and of course the kind of activities that we have seen in terms of international partners providing aid and support to the country, we keep talking about how perhaps we need to be able to get a better understanding of the assessment of damages. And we have seen the numbers that were quoted earlier increasing, but there's still so much that is going on, so many people that are still suffering, that perhaps the kind of issues that we keep pointing out are not yet understood by the world in terms of how big a scale this is. And when we talk about the kind of support that is needed, particularly what was said by the UN Secretary General as well in terms of justice, is that even something that we can actually have in the conversation regarding climate change? Because when we talk about the countries, and especially the global north, being more responsible, more accountable, that's of course the moral responsibility that they need to show. But where will the accountability come from?
Right, Sana, and as usual, quite a stacked question, too many parts, and we are going to talk about that. But you said when you look at this situation, so let me draw attention to another situation, that is your visit to Sindh, where you've been to Sakhar, you've been to Larkana and Osta Mohammed also. So first of all, tell us how was it? Because you also interviewed the Secretary General of United Nations, but I am interested in understanding what exactly was the situation as you perceived it through your own eyes.
Right, so we went to various places, including Sakhar, Larkana, Usta Mohammed, and various other parts of Sindh and Balochistan, as you mentioned. There was also a visit to relief camps and also to various areas where the flood victims have been relocated for now. There was also discussion with the first respondents who've been giving in help, also giving in help at a time when their own families were suffering immensely. And that on ground, seeing the kind of stories and hearing hearing from the people in terms of the kind of devastation and trauma that they went through, and despite that they were bringing forth the kind of help that is needed from them was in fact remarkable, and it was wonderful to see that. But on a larger scale, when you look at the extent of the suffering and the extent of the damages, Farooq, it was quite a surprise, even though we understand that 1/3 of the country is of course affected by these floods. But when you actually witness it, when you actually see the scale, and we had a chance to look at it from an aerial view as well, was huge. And it was difficult to imagine that this was land, this was where people lived, they had homes there, which is all water now. And then when you take a look at the kind of temperatures that currently exist, it was extremely hot, and there wasn't a lot of places where people had access to clean drinking water, and they were just suffering still in relief camps, which we're trying to help as much as they can. But the kind of issues that people have, especially women who are pregnant, there was a camp where we went where women had just given birth to a child a few days ago, and there have been so many more like that, is immense, and makes you realize how easy and beautiful your life is, and we keep on forgetting the number of blessings that we have. So that was of course there, but the one thing that also came in the forefront was that the scale of the damage and suffering is huge. And even though we're really responding and there is help coming in and a lot of people and organizations are contributing, there is so much more that is needed to be done.
Absolutely. Now let me go back to your question regarding the moral aspect, international aspect as well. You understand that the international community is well connected right now, and they are actually supplying whatever aid they can mustered right now. Today, actually 3 planes with provisions actually arrived from the US. So far they have sent 10 planes, right? Today, government of Pakistan launched its dashboard for the transparency of the funds that the government is collecting, so that they can be actually put to a good use. And then we also heard from PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, their leadership also actually spoke about how they are going to, whatever money they have collected, they are going to disperse it as well. So at this moment, it seems that everybody is connected, everybody is focused, and they want to actually help as much as you can or they can. But the problem right now is that when you talk about this global morality issue, the saddest part is that in international system, there is no morality, right? You can keep on talking to people about the responsibility they have towards underdeveloped countries. Pakistan was a former colony. Pakistan is also a victim of climate change, despite the fact that Pakistan is not contributing to it. But when you talk to them, anyone in the Western world, thanks to Donald Trump's rise, they say that it is not our problem. So at this moment, baby steps, Sana, let us focus on this situation on the ground, and let us hope that when we get a proper estimate, the world will also step up to the plate.
Right. Mr. Hamid, when we take a look at what was earlier said by the UN Secretary General, of course, he took a strong stance in terms of calling out the countries responsible for global carbon emissions, also talking about how there needs to be justice. And this is, of course, important in terms of the kind of appeal that exists and the kind of help that Pakistan needs at the moment. But when we take a look at the issues of sustained support, that also is part of the conversation, that needs to flow in much after the water has receded. That perhaps is still a question mark in terms of whether or not Pakistan will be able to get that, or will be able to allocate its own resources as well, considering, of course, our own economic situation as well. When we take a look at the current issues that Pakistan faces and the kind of effort and the scale at which we need to be able to allocate resources to recover from this, do you think that it is something that we can expect in terms of support even after the floodwaters have receded?
Thank you very much, Sana. I must appreciate the way you have explained the situation with your own eyes, and you've been witnessed all the catastrophe, what is happening with this devastated flood. And as Mr. Patafi has said, rightly said all the points. I just want to say, a few things. I was in a program with Dr. Amjad Saqib from Huwat, and he rightly said that he has not much hope from the world community to help Pakistan, especially from the modern world, where they are the one who are the responsible. I mean, if I give you the figures of carbon emission, Pakistan's contribution towards the global carbon emission is less than 0.04%, less than a half of the percent. And Pakistan have faced the biggest calamity of due to this climate and carbon emission in last 80 years. This is the biggest devastation we have seen, and we are suffering of it. Unfortunately, world is reluctant and world is not still realizing how much damage it has done. We need to tell the world in the comparison. When we talk about 1/3 of Pakistan is flooded, it means it is over 260,000 kilometer square area of Pakistan, which is more than the entire United Kingdom of 243,000 kilometer square. When we talk about 33 million people have been affected or displaced, it means it is more than the half of the population of entire United Kingdom. When we talk about the 4,000 kilometer of the roads infrastructure has been demolished or has been wiped out, it means it is more the roads infrastructure of half of the France. Then if we talk about the casualties, it's over 2,000 casualties so far due to this flood, and every third person who's died is whether a woman or a child. So it is a responsibility of the world to understand that how devastating and disastrous this flood is, and by announcing the few $1 million help is not going to achieve where Pakistan have faced over $30 billion of losses, and it will take good 5 to 10 years for Pakistan to recover. And in terms of, as you said, thousands of hectare, crops being damaged, which is going to cause Pakistan a food crisis. So this is the time when not only modern countries, rather the world organizations such as United Nations, WHO, UNICEF, and other organizations has to help Pakistan. Equally, the monetary and world financial organizations such as IMF, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, they all have to come forward and give Pakistan a kind of relief in our debts, because on the one hand, we always have a pressure to pay out the debts. On the other hand,
right,
how would we be able to fight all that? That's the very important issue.
Right.
And one thing I want to say, just one.
Yes. Yes, carry on.
Just one last thing. Sana, the one last thing is that is great, success of our nation, that we are still, alhamdulillah, we are together. People are sending charities and donations, and most of the help is coming from Pakistan inside and outside, which is always, Pakistanis are together and we are helping, and this is the time we have to help beyond our political differences. As Mr. Patafi has rightly said, whether it is Imran Khan or Shehbaz Sharif or anybody, we are only working for the one cause, and that is to rehabilitation of flood affectees.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mr. Inshan, of course, another important factor over here is the kind of impact that this has had on cultivated land. And we have seen loss of very important crops, which is, of course, already affecting the kind of issues that we're seeing in the market in terms of access, in terms of resource, in terms of whoever gets to be able to get such things which are needed in terms of our food demands. But when we take a look at the impact right now, we also know that it's going to have consequences far longer than just right now. This is, of course, the kind of agricultural output that we needed for the next couple of months. Since we've lost many of that, what do you think needs to be the way forward in terms of making sure that we're not plunging into another very deep crisis within this crisis?
Well, thank you, Sana. See, the challenge here has been with Pakistan's agriculture is that our productivity has been very low. It's been lower than that of most of the countries in our region. Internationally, we've been way behind other countries, and which is why we don't have enough agri produce which we can store and we can use in such times, right? So this is a major flaw, because I'm afraid I'll have to say this, but we haven't really shown a strategy for agriculture sector ever. in the last 30, 40 years. And which is why today we are running out of essentials, and there is a serious shortfall because Sindh province, which has been affected the most, approximately 1.2 million hectares of agri land has been affected, has caused shortage of basic commodities like onions and tomatoes, because Sindh contributes something like 36 and 25% to the national growth of these or production of these commodities. And additionally, now you'll see a shortage of rice production. Around 80% of rice production in Sindh will be affected. More than 85% of cotton production in Sindh will be affected. And rice, which is grown in Sindh, is the variety which is exported the most. So what you will also see is a further decrease in our food exports. Our food exports as it is are, only 4.3 billion out of 25 billion of our exports, whereas our food imports are around $8.3 billion. So, this food trade gap will further increase. What needs to be done is to put in place a long-term, a 7 to 10 year strategy for the agri sector, to transform the agri sector, to increase productivity, and then support it with resilient storage infrastructure, because that is what is missing. Being a country where agri is 20% of Pakistan's GDP, right, and more than 40% of the labor force is employed in agriculture, we just don't have the kind of infrastructure that our agri sector deserves. So these are two essential things. And the other thing I was also, it was in the news today on PTV, that the President of Pakistan has urged for establishment of insurance products for small farmers. And this is another area, because unless we don't have insurance, it will be very difficult to promote investment in the agri sector. And
Right.
Investment is what the agri sector needs right now.
Right, and this is quite intriguing. Let me ask you, because I also come from a partly rural background. The question is that we have been hearing about these insurances and then of course agricultural tax also throughout our lives, but for some reason that doesn't happen. For starters, there don't seem to be the kind of companies that are needed to insure it. What do you mean by the insurance? Do you think that the government of Pakistan should be providing it?
Okay, so there could be multiple models, but what I would like to suggest here and propose, what other countries have done in the agri sector successfully, is set up an agriculture insurance pool. Now what this does is brings in all the insurance companies from the private sector and the government sector. The government comes in as one of the partners, a separate institution is set up, which then protects the farmers and the production from any weather related losses. Now today we have a natural disaster, but between 2014 and now 2022, we've had very erratic weather events which have caused loss in agri production.
No, I get it. I get it.
So
my humble submission is, since you are talking about a pool, fiscal space doesn't seem to be there. And these companies that you talk about, most of them are focused on insuring my car or your car, your house, or certain companies, but they're not going to actually take care of the farmer sector. So
Yes.
I don't think that there is evidence enough
Yes.
that this could happen.
Yes.
And this is
Exactly.
where the government should come in, and
Money.
because these insurance companies have been granted license by the government of Pakistan or the state of Pakistan to deliver on its policy agenda. It's not just to for profit maximization of their shareholders. They have to deliver on the policy agenda of Pakistan, and agri is that agenda. And the private sector will have to deliver. Otherwise, the government will have to have a kind of a dirigist policy, unfortunately.
All right, let me also bring in the conversation, Mr. Safwan. Thank you for waiting so patiently. When we take a look at the current issues, of course, with regards to the agricultural output that we have lost, there is, of course, this larger and longer term discussion, which is absolutely necessary and important. But when we take a look at the immediate term and what the current floods is impacting at the moment, is of course our access to this agriculture output, which we have lost. Is there something that the government or other institutions can do or act right now to somehow facilitate or help contribute in terms of the larger public good and food security issues that our people will eventually have to face?
Look, thank you for having me, Sana. The way I see it, like right about now, if you go look at the farms, it's all flooded. There's water everywhere, and then in Sindh, there's a big population living at the farms. So the first thing we needed to do is make sure that they are having food and they are not left behind. Now, if you go look at the farms, they're all flooded, and the crops, they're all damaged. There's nothing we can do about it. But if you look at the future, when are we going to be able to start harvesting or start producing our fruits and vegetables again? It's going to take a while because the water is there to stay. And because there's no way the water could go. And this isn't something, I don't think the government would know how to deal with this because this is like a crime that we Pakistanis did not commit. It's a natural disaster. And it has come through the global warming and the climate change is real. The countries need to realize it's real. And I think it's like we're paying for a penalty for a crime that Pakistanis did not commit. And the world needs to come out and speak about it and need to pay, like all of you guys said, the countries that are having the global carbon emissions, they need to come forward and because they're making profits out of the carbon emissions they are releasing in the world, right? So they need to come out, cut their profits, and help the countries that are most affected by their crime. And we are not the ones, because no country like Pakistan can pay for, like, our whole economy is based on agriculture. Like, most of the people I come across with, in Sindh especially, are somehow connected to agriculture economically. That's their bread and butter. So I'm not sure how this is going to help out, but if governments could jump in and somehow make the water disappear, which is very not likely, but it's a critical situation right now.
All right. Mr. Enchan, if you would also add to that in terms of the kind of immediate measures that we can take right now.
Well, unfortunately, immediate measures, are only going to be relief-based. I think the way we rehabilitate and rebuild has to be very well planned and well thought out.
And imports as well?
Well, imports, see, we are in a situation where we are importing wheat.
Yeah.
Last fiscal we've imported $1 billion worth of wheat. I mean, we became wheat self-sufficient a long time back, but we've lost that position. Of course, we will have to substitute, and we should have been in a position where we should have been exporting agri produce. But to answer Sana your question, immediately I think it's just going to be relief efforts. But going forward, I think we need to build the agri value chain, especially in Balochistan and in Sindh, in a way which is resilient and we are prepared. Just in case of food shortages, we are prepared for those situations. We can't stop the floods from coming, but what we can do is build infrastructure. What we haven't done is built infrastructure, and Patafi Saab will of course say where is that fiscal space to do that, and this is where I think your other guests have talked about it. I think the developed countries have induced this climate change, and we are suffering from the consequences of this climate change, and therefore we should be entering into, as Secretary General also mentioned, maybe some sort of a debt swap or reparations for the damages that we face today.
Right, and I want to talk a bit more about this debt swap and reparations as well, because Dr. Hamid also spoke about that. So I'll ask you, Dr. Hamid, with that. But before that, Farrukh, I want to also understand the kind of economic impact that the loss of this agriculture output is already having in terms of what we're facing. Yeah. We were already undergoing huge inflation and, of course, a very difficult economic situation within the country where the common man was already suffering and finding it hard to make ends meet. And now, of course, when we take a look at the agricultural issues and the food security issues, it means that the prices are going to go even higher and it's going to be even more difficult to buy basic essentials. When we talk about what the government can do in terms of ensuring or helping the larger poor section of the country in light of this devastation? Can there be any way in which we can perhaps provide regulations or ensure somehow that the common man doesn't have to suffer even more?
Right, Sana, let me just clarify that I don't take any pleasure in telling you or anybody that this can't be done or it might not happen. I'm not a skeptic by nature. I'm an optimist. Unfortunately, the problem is there's hardly any evidence, right? At this moment, when we are expecting a credit swap or some kind of relief for that matter, Pakistan was forced to jack up the electricity prices once again because IMF is breathing down our neck. Similarly, when you talk about the start of the program, at that time Inshan Sahab actually pointed out how badly our crops have been affected. Remember that most of these crops are staple food at this moment. And what is going to happen? These people are going to actually either going to buy it from a market because of scarcity, it is going to be very expensive. Or the second possibility is you start importing as much as you can. I understand that we have been importing wheat, and we did in the last year as well. But we cannot renegotiate the past. We have to live in the present. At this moment, the kind of state of affairs that we are in, we have to actually keep on motivating and keep on moving. Right now, we are you just mentioned Sindh, right? And Sindh, no doubt, is badly affected. But southern Punjab is also sinking. Similarly, Balochistan is badly broken. And earlier, before the start of the program, we were having discussion that, livestock has been badly damaged in Balochistan. And remember that when you talk about Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, there people are sitting in inclement weather and winter is coming, Sana. We have to actually do a lot of things at this moment. No fairy godmother is going to come with the magic wand and help us out. We'll have to help ourselves right now. The first thing is, at this moment, we have to focus. Pakistan has 50 channels and most of them are actually playing politics. Let us do one thing here in PTV. Let us focus on governance rather than politics. And because we are doing it, we are focusing on how policies can be changed. Let us actually become an engine of good ideas. The problem is there is no bad idea. The only problem is we have to look at the reality also. Our technocrats, our specialists keep on talking about these great ideas. But the fact is, as I proved it the other day to you in this program, that when you talk about reality on ground, it doesn't match with that. I mean, I could have drones in this country that could actually be flying to all the stranded people, but do we have the kind of capacity? Do we have that kind of resources? We don't. We have to start where we are at this moment, and let us hope in coming days we pull ourselves together and not be partisan.
Absolutely. Mr. Hamid, when we take a look at the situation and the kind of emphasis that there is on our international partners stepping up and helping us also in terms of debt relief or debt swaps, when we take a look at all of this, and perhaps it's right to talk about these things or to put this into the light that this is something that the world needs to do or act and be more responsible and accountable in terms of climate change. But that's of course something that is going to take a while and that we don't have time for. And when we take a look at the kind of emphasis that is being put on international help, it sort of somehow also has the impact of taking away from our responsibility at home as well. Given the current situation that Pakistan is currently in, do you think that this is something that we can afford right now to just emphasize on how our international partners should be able to step up, even though we've seen in the past that it hasn't happened or the possibility seems bleak because there's a lot that's going on at home that requires our attention?
Yes, Sana, you rightly said that, I mean, we can't have much hope from the Western world or the modern world. The reason is that we have seen their selfishness in many occasions in past past as well. We have seen their, I should say, dual standard and hypocritic, statements or policies in terms of matters dealing with Muslims or calamities or suffering of the Muslims or third world country suffering, and as compared to the suffering when they are talking about Ukraine and Russia war, their attitude is different. When it is a matter of their energy crisis or their oil and gas crisis coming in this winter, their approach is different. But they will not understand that how much important it is for Pakistan to get the livelihood and get the rehabilitation of our people who are actually having no shelters as well. I believe that this is the time, as Mr. Patafi has rightly said, this is the time when nation has to be together, nation has to put all the differences on the side, nation has to come together. We have seen at the time of earthquake in 2005, we have seen at the flood in 2010, and I think, this is the only way out. We can expect the help from our Muslim brotherly countries, we can expect help from China, but as far as America and Europe is concerned, they are making their own issues at the moment, and they would not be able to help us much. Yes, we have a very solid ground. We have a very genuine case of our debt swap or scrapping our debts and not putting a pressure on our economy anymore by increasing the electricity prices or petrol prices. We have a very strong argument. We have a very strong reason. But the question is, who's going to understand that? IMF is going to understand that. I have no hope for it. Is World Bank is going to come forward and take the responsibility? I have no hope for it. So, this is a matter we have to put our case properly. There is no doubt about it. But having a very much positive hope or optimistic, I'm sorry, I can't be very optimistic. Rather than the nation has to be together to face the biggest devastation we have seen since Pakistan has come into existence.
Sana, can I clarify one point? When I said that don't expect miracles from the world, I was not saying that the Western world is not going to do it. Mashriqi Saab is entitled to his views. My point was, if you remember that we had a Western analyst in this program a few days ago, and he said that for the life of him, he cannot see the US Congress actually meeting and considering some kind of reparations for Pakistan, right? This is the state of affairs, that these are democratic countries and their constituents keep on demanding that their interests be met first. And the problem with IMF and World Bank and other bodies is that they have boards, and those boards are actually answerable to various countries that actually put in the money. Right. So in that state of affairs, I don't think that immediate miracles are going to happen. First of all, take care of the situation on ground. Army chief spoke about prefabricated houses. Great idea. Bring it on. PTI spoke about data. Bring it on. These are great ideas. Put them to good use and we can move on. Then we can wear the activist cap and go all over the world and start actually talking about some kind of reparation or swaps. But right now, charity begins at home, and we have to take care of these matters.
Right, but Farooq, when we take a look at the fact that if it's up to us and if we have to handle the situation, there is a lot that's also hindering that to actually happen. Of course, there is the economic situation. There's also the political situation in terms of the people actually sitting down and getting together in terms of our strategy and policy. So can we actually move forward in this area as well? If we're closing one door and saying that's not going to happen, is this going to happen at home?
Yeah, my problem, the moment I actually mentioned 50 channels not focusing on these matters at all. There are exceptions. Hamid Mir is, mashallah, moving around across the, flood affected areas. You also went. Our PTV crew also was everywhere. But most of the channels are not leaving their studios. My problem is, give me 10 channels that can actually help us in building pressure on politicians to actually come together. Right. Wear them down. We can do it. We have done it in the past also. They sat together in the past. Remember 2014 when there was APS Peshawar incident? At that time, Imran Khan Sahab was agitating in Islamabad. But then they all sat together and we got National Action Plan. Why not do it now? But for that, media and pundits will have to cooperate, and they'll have to, start putting up a lot of pressure on these leaders.
Absolutely. And Mr.
Exactly.
Safwan,
I agree.
when we take a look at the kind of situation that currently exists and the issues that you earlier pointing out, of course, I understand that you're also directly impacted by this. But then we take a look at the huge number of people and population which has been impacted perhaps far greatly in terms of the kind of losses that they have seen. What do you think that farm owners such as yourself can do in your own capacity and help mobilize the kind of aid that we need at home? Because there's of course a lot that needs to be done by our own community as well if we're going to be able to see any tangible change.
Yeah, thanks. And now look, we as landowners, we've got a lot of people associated with us. So economically, right about now, there's people who work on daily wages. Now we can see there's no daily wages. People, their life goes by with their daily wages. We pay them the wages they get. They bring bread and butter to the table. Right about now, there's no work for them. So we are the ones trying to support them. But always there's a limited capacity with us. We can support them for say a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. But then because we're not going to be getting any economic funds for within us. We've lost, obviously, as farmers, we do have capacity to help them for a little longer. But then what government could do now is they can bring our costs down. For example, like if we get a subsidy on diesel, we will be able to produce crops at a lesser price than normal. And then they could bring subsidy on fertilizers. That's when the water is gone. But right about now, we can't do anything. But we see our responsibility for, like, all the people have lost their jobs, but we're still trying to help them. But I don't see it going for very long. There's always you could help for a certain time, but then you need to help yourself too.
Right, absolutely, and I understand that. Mr. Inshan, when we take a look at issues at home as well and to our responses to such situations, there's of course also the issue of planning and coordination. We've seen so many different institutions, individuals, organizations act in terms of the kind of response and relief activities that have been going on, but there was a lot of issues with regards to how different departments and institutions have collaborated amongst each other, and it seems that there didn't exist a plan or a strategy in place in terms of how do we respond to such crises. Given the fact of the impact that the climate situation has on countries like Pakistan, it seems that unfortunately we might be finding ourselves again in such a situation. Given this, how do we make sure that before such a calamity occurs, we are well prepared in terms of the kind of response strategies that are required to put in place? Of course, there's policy level at a larger scale that needs to be formulated, but also in terms of action plans and coordination among different provinces and districts. That doesn't seem to exist, even though the bodies and authorities are there, but the coordination or planning among them isn't.
And with your permission, can I also add to this question, Sana?
Yes.
Inshan Sahab, let us also talk about data. Earlier, when you were talking about insurance of lands, and earlier also Safwan Sahab was also talking about people getting wages, I was thinking that how many people or the state institutions have any record of how much people are paid in the villages, and for that matter, people get out of their lands, which are very small, right? Is it possible to expect from the government that it curates data and databases in such a way that the policy makers then can actually make policies and have targeted interventions?
Absolutely. I mean, you've raised a critical point, and I was actually going to talk about this point. There is no one in this country who knows how many farmers there are, how much land they've cultivated in the last season, or which crops they're growing. And this is one of the major limitations, whether you talk about insurance or you talk about credit. There is just no data available, and it makes it more expensive and more difficult to actually put those services out for the small farmers. And 89% of Pakistan's farms are actually small. They're subsistence. They're 12.5 acres or less, which is 5 hectares. Right? So data is a major limitation, and this is also in a way connected with what Sana talked about, is the institutional structure and its operation. So the institutional structure is, unfortunately, I have to use this term, is almost broken in terms of coordination. There are certain things at the federal level, certain at the provincial level, and both levels are debating whose responsibility it should be. So yes, I mean, we have to have a more centralized approach, and then implementation closer to the field. But for strategy, for coordination, to develop a well-coordinated, a well-oiled machine for response, as Sana, you mentioned, I think a centralized approach is very, very important, and this also applies for the agri sector. So we don't have a central strategy for Pakistan. For example, there is livestock in Balochistan, there is livestock in KP, there is livestock in Tharparkar. If you take Tharparkar and Balochistan, they account for 35% of the small animals in Pakistan. So are you going to have a separate strategy for Balochistan and a separate one for Tharparkar? That is not an efficient use of resources. So you need to have a centralized approach.
But what do you do with the 18th Amendment?
Now that is a question I leave for the politicians to answer.
But it is a legal question.
Yeah, absolutely, I totally agree with you. But maybe within, look, there are a lot of elements within even keeping the 18th Amendment one could actually do if there was political consensus, and which is very important, again, coming to an earlier point that you were making and Sana was making, that this neoliberal economic order that comes through the IMF and the international organizations, also termed as the Washington Consensus, is about free market, deregulation and privatization. I mean, in a country like Pakistan where there's 40% incidence of poverty, this approach does not necessarily work. And we have to have our own economic order, but to have that, we need to have our own political order and political consensus to back that kind of a change. And that is when we can also claim, this debt swap deal, or go and talk to the international players on a solid footing. Right now, I think, it's so fragmented, our entire system is so fragmented that unfortunately we will not be able to do it in the current situation.
Sana, your question actually reminded me of a recent but very sad and tragic incident, episode, anecdote. Let me very quickly tell you.
Sure.
Recently, when Balochistan, floods came in Balochistan, right? When it's all started, certain bodies actually floated into Punjab. And in southern Punjab, between the jurisdiction of two cities, the bodies were stuck in under one bridge, and both sides could not pull them out because nobody was sure whose jurisdiction it is, right? So absolutely right. I agree with you that this system is broken. And when you talk about that data also, it exists, but in the register of Patta or Patwaris, and nobody has actually really transferred it, automated or brought it to the computers.
Yes, Mr. Savan, you've been wanting to add something.
Yeah, since we're talking about data, I would just like to let you guys know that I come from a village called Tando Sumro. It's a small village, a population of 5,000.
Yeah.
And we do collect data, all the people, those who live in Tando Sumro and those what they earn every year or every monthly. And we've got a system, we've got an organization based in that village, Tando Sumro, where we see who's earning what, and then who needs more aid from us. So we do that a kind of system through our organization. We do have a lot of other systems as well. Like we were able to drain out rainwater within 24 hours. No other village could did that, but we as an organization did it ourselves. We do manage our own drainage systems, but that's for the villages. We can't do that for the farms.
Absolutely,
but as a village,
and Mr. Safwan, that is of course commendable, and perhaps it means that we have a lot to learn from people and organizations like yourselves and replicate that on a larger national scale. Dr. Hamid, we're short on time, but very quickly I want to ask you that when we take a look at the kind of climate change responsibility that exists globally, we of course are talking about how our global north or international partners need to act better, but there's a lot that needs to be done at home as well. We haven't really put any strong emphasis on climate change issues within Pakistan. We don't take this seriously and we don't have in place the kind of strategies that are needed, the kind of responses that are needed. We've seen such disasters before, of course on a different scale, but it has to be something that keeps on increasing in terms of the scale, since the climate change issues keep on rising. So when we take a look at the kind of emphasis that Pakistan needs to actually put on these issues, it seems to be quite late on the list. Will that change after these floods?
Exactly, you are absolutely right. It is very important that government and the policy makers have to put this on the top priority now, because it is not that we should not learn the lesson. It is the biggest lesson for us to learn, and it should be a wake-up call for the rest of the nation as well. And I think the government has to put a proper policy and has to do whatever constitution requires to do it. In terms of 18th Amendment, yes, I know there are many hurdles because of that. So, if there is a requirement of any changes in the constitution towards the responsibilities in terms of eco-balance in the country, there has to be taken, because now this is the time for us to
Thank you very much.
cover.
Unfortunately, we're short on time. Yes, Mr. Inshan, very quickly.
The
Yeah.
government will have to retake charge of its responsibilities, which unfortunately it has outsourced for a long time now.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Inshan, Mr. Safwan, Dr. Hamid, and of course Farooq Batafi for being with us in the debate.
Thank you.
There is, of course, a lot that needs to be done. There needs to be urgent action both at home and globally, and we hope that we can take this seriously. That's all that we have from the debate. See you tomorrow.